Hi, my name is Laura Burgoyne, and I'm excited to be joining together with my sister Connie Blackwood in the NOSA Unleashed podcast. Here, we want to expose the stigma surrounding mental health issues by illuminating and discussing real-life challenges and obstacles, keeping us paralyzed and fearful to move forward. Let us inspire you to believe there's more to life than what you're currently experiencing. You can rise from your despair and find hope for the future. It's time to end the silence, remove the stigma of mental health, and to pursue the path to purpose and fulfillment. We will do this together because no one stands alone. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the NOSA Unleashed podcast. I'm Laura Burgoyne, and today we're going to be continuing our conversation from last time on coping mechanisms. And today our focus is on how we numb our pain and trauma through medicating and addiction. And so I would like to welcome Connie, my sister, who joins me in these conversations.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure having you here as we delve deep into these issues and try to bring some greater clarity and normalcy to these struggles that we all face. And oftentimes we try to ignore. And so let's just start off with talking about how we numb our pain with medicating, Connie. So this area, I think, is pretty big topic, and I don't think we always recognize how far-reaching that it is. And I think a lot of times this can actually come on without us even realizing it, right? So I'll use an example. If I was really struggling with depression and really lacking motivation in life, and, I wanted some help and I go see my doctor, oftentimes they don't work with you to try to find the underlying cause. They're just like, okay, they're going to treat the symptom, which is, your depression, your lack of motivation. And so, they're so quick to just say, here's some antidepressants. This will help you with your mood. This will help keep you more balanced, all of those things. But what they're not realizing is the fact that it's not dealing with any of the underlying issues. Like, why am I feeling depressed? Why am I having no motivation for life? And I think this is a huge problem, right? Because, then we just get in this mentality of like dealing with the symptoms, dealing with the emotion, or dealing with how I feel in the moment, and not looking below the surface as to why I'm feeling those ways. And, we also know that with these drugs, with these medications, they have side effects. They're hard to get off. They are in a lot of cases addicting, or they take a long process to wean yourself off. And all the meanwhile, like, you're not really dealing with the issue at hand.
Yeah, it's still festering there in the background. Similar to like what I said last time, when you don't deal with something, it doesn't go away. It's just sitting there. And even like it's still affecting you.
Yeah.
Even if you don't recognize it, even if you're numb to it, it's not like it's not impacting the way that you respond to the world around you and like the way that you view yourself even. And so if you don't acknowledge those things, if you don't deal with those things, then it's just going to continue to build in you. So for those of you who are on medication, I would encourage you, maybe alongside of that, coupling it with mentorship or counseling or something where you can get to the root of those issues. And hopefully you can eventually wean yourself off the medication with the advice of your doctor. Do not come off any medications without your doctor's assistance. Because when you're on those kinds of medications, if you try to cut it out cold turkey, it can actually do more harm to you than staying on them. And so just be very, very careful. And once you've dealt with the underlying issue, talk to your doctor, come off slowly, and always do it according to the doctor's recommendations, because you don't want to cause yourself more harm.
Absolutely. In that regard too, I've also heard of people who have been on these antidepressants or these other drugs, and it's numbed them to the place where they couldn't even feel, they couldn't even think, like they couldn't
Hmm.
focus. I mean, if they tried to come talk about what they're going through, they just have no idea. They've become so numb to what the issues are. And so if you're in that camp, you might not be able to deal with the underlying causes prior to weaning yourself off. And so you might need to talk to your doctor ahead of time and say, and be working with a counselor or a psychologist while you're being weaned off, so that when you start to feel those things again, and you're able to come out of that numbed state, that you'll be able to start processing some of these things. Because I know that some of the people that I've personally talked to, like, they're just completely, they're just so numb that they don't even know where to start, and I think that's a really difficult place to start if you are wanting to find freedom in your life. If you
Hmm.
can't feel and you don't know what the underlying cause is, if you can't put words to that, then it would be really hard for you to pursue that kind of healing. And so I saw this picture the other day. It was of a pill bottle, and on the pill bottle, there was this little quote, and it said she took each pill to escape what her life had become until she became numb. And that's kind of the picture that I'm trying to show here with how we numb our pain with medicating. And I just want to encourage anyone who's listening that, you know, maybe you're before that stage. Maybe you're just in the trauma. Maybe you're just in experiencing these difficult things and you don't know how to process these thoughts. I would encourage you not to try to numb the pain, because numbing the pain doesn't take it away. It's just like, if I had an injury or broke my leg or whatnot, I could put all sorts of ointments or creams or take medications to not feel that pain. But unless I like reset the broken bone and try to heal what was wrong underneath, when I no longer took those pain meds, it's going to hurt just the same or maybe even worse, because the problem would have gotten worse.
Well, especially if you're trying to walk on it, it would definitely get worse.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, Connie, that is so true. Like, if we're numb, right, then other things could be happening in our life causing us even more trauma, and we're completely even unaware,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, so, so true. All right. How about addiction? I know this problem has run rampant in our family.
Hmm. And not just
And
substances.
yeah, and that's a huge thing to point out. And so, oftentimes when we talk about addiction, we we immediately think about something related to either alcohol or drugs.
Hmm.
But I would say, and I think Connie, you would agree with me, that anything that you use repeatedly to cope with stress and pain in your life is an addiction and will need to be addressed.
Hmm.
And I'll actually just list off a few things, for example. So we obviously know drugs and alcohol. Those are often coping mechanisms that are considered addictive. But what about gambling, right? How about shopping,
Mm.
perfectionism, workaholic, right? If you're working 16 hours a day so that you don't have to deal with your life and it becomes habitual, that is an addiction. How about pornography? That's an escape from your current life. How about a sexual addiction, physical harming, eating disorders, and that there's many different things that fall under that category.
How about
Um,
binge watching Netflix?
absolutely. Binge watching TV or even online entertainment. What about like even scrolling on your phone,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Like it's like you don't want to deal with what's happening in your life and you find out that, oh, I've been scrolling on Facebook for 3 hours here, right? Another one could be excessive exercise. And these aren't conclusive. Like there's more. Like anything that you do repeatedly to avoid pain or difficulty or trauma in your life, those are addictions and they will need to be dealt with.
Video games. It's another one.
Yes, video games is huge. So let's take it back to our own personal story, Connie. Like, you know, our life was difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we had, so we had modeled to us as young children, not in our direct like family, but in our external family, like grandparents, not grandparents, but like cousins, aunts,
Yeah.
uncles. Um, you know, how you cope with these things is through addiction, right? And a lot of times it came in the formation of alcoholism
Mm-hmm.
or even drug abuse. There's some drug abuse too. And as a young child, I saw the impact of those, right? We've had loved ones die because of the consequences of those addictions. And so as a young child, I remember making a mental, like an actual cognitive decision that I'm never touching those things, right? I don't want to cope in the same way as my family did.
Mm-hmm.
And for many years I wore that as like a badge of honor, right? Like, well,
Right.
I don't have an addiction, right? I don't drink alcohol. I don't take drugs. But little did I know, I did have an addiction. I struggled. I had a coping mechanism. And it wasn't until many, 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 many years later did I realize how much of a hold this had on my life. And my addiction was to sugar. You
Yeah,
know,
and
I would,
I remember when you told me that, I was like, you weren't addicted to sugar. And then you were pointing out specific things, and I'm like, oh, she was like
Mhm.
eating whole sugar packets. Like I totally forgot about stuff like that.
Yeah, because in the moment it didn't, it some of these things that we fall into in the addiction category, they're they're socially acceptable,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's socially acceptable to play video games. It's socially acceptable to go shopping. But what people don't always realize is when it's become an obsession in my life and a way of avoidance, right? And for me, the sugar consumption, like I had so much anxiety and depression and issues in my life that was the only way I could cope in social settings, right? And so I would consume incredible amounts of sugar, which would hype me right up, right? And I would have these huge highs, but then I had to go home and I would have these huge lows. And each time that gap got bigger and that need for sugar got larger in my life. And I remember even being pregnant with my son, like I had to have a minimum of 2 Slurpees a day, right? I was coping with all the stress in such unhealthy ways. And this is something that has consumed a good majority of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I became aware of the fact that, you know what, this need to have sugar is actually controlling my life, that I could actually put words to it, like I am addicted to sugar, that I was able to start making some really good changes in my life and choose better coping mechanisms because it didn't benefit me at all. And in fact, it made things much worse for me. But how many times do we choose addiction as our coping mechanism? But I mean, we would say to you, I don't have an addiction.
Mm-hmm. I when I was a kid, I would read. That was mine. I
Mm,
would read. And anytime I felt stress, anytime I felt overwhelmed, anytime I felt like I just couldn't cope, I pulled out a book and I escaped into the imaginary world that it created for me. And
mm,
like it was crazy how much and it was reading is a good thing. So everyone encouraged me to read. So it wasn't something that, was bad. but it was still an addiction for me because it was a way of me escaping the things I needed to face. It was my way of numbing the pain that I was experiencing on a daily basis, right? Because our childhood had some traumatic things happen, right? And so there's pain that is attached to the trauma. And so in order to escape that, I would read all of these books that were all these fiction books about different worlds and different people, and I could just dive into those things and not have to face my own reality, right? And so that was my coping mechanism. And then when I realized that, then I stopped reading for a time. And now it's hard sometimes for me to read because I'm like, what's my motivation for reading? Right? That's always in the back of my head because I don't want to go back to where I was. And I think you can go too far the other way, right? Especially if it's something that's a good thing for you. Like, it's good to read. It's good, especially when it's a good, positive book that's actually helping you, right? There's so many things that people have written that can actually help you in so many positive ways. And so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, but it's a matter of maintaining that balance and not going, okay, this isn't a way to escape. No, I'm reading because I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to, even if it's a fiction book, this is a way I can actually just have some enjoyment in my life, right? And so, but it has to be the right motivation. So now when I sit down to read, it's like, okay, why am I sitting down to read right now? And if I can honestly answer that it's because I want to either learn, grow, or have some fun, great. If it's about, oh, I don't want to deal with this thing, then I have a problem and I need to put the book down because I need to go deal with the thing. So
yeah, that's so true, because even with my sugar, right, it's not like I can never eat a dessert again in my lifetime, or I can't. It's like about the motivation behind it, right? If I'm using that to cope, if I'm using that to, avoid what is going on in my life in that current moment, then it's bad, right? But if I'm, out for dinner with my family and we're enjoying a dessert together because we like to spend time together, and like that's okay. Like, it's when has something become a habitual need that you have in your life that you use to cope with the problems in your life. And that's when it becomes a problem. And I think, like, for everything that I had mentioned, for example, exercise not a bad thing, right? But if that becomes the focus of my life and it takes me away from being able to, deal with my issues, because sometimes when people choose excessive exercise is because they have deeper issues with, self-esteem. They don't want to look a certain way. And so they are so driven in the opposite direction. Like you said, Connie, there's two extremes, right? And so I think that's important to also clarify, is not everyone who goes to the gym is addicted, right? Like, not everyone who, like you said, reads a book hasn't it, like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's that
not everyone who has sugar in their diet is addicted to sugar.
Exactly. But for me, that's what mine was, right? And I think, if we look at our lives and we can recognize moments where, like, we're using these activities or these substances to avoid or to numb what we're feeling, that's a pretty good indication that you have something you need to deal with. All right, now that we've identified those two ways of coping, let's shift the conversation and talk about, well, how do we manage this? How do we shift it into something positive, or how do we look at it from the opposite direction? How in those moments when I find myself starting to use sugar again as a coping mechanism, how can I shift that to allow me to actually be in the moment and deal with what I'm facing?
Well, like, I think it goes back to the motivation question, right? Why? So if you know that something is your go-to, if you know that something is your addiction, if you know that something is your coping mechanism, and you have recognized it as an addiction, then when you're picking that thing up, asking yourself that question, why am I doing this right now? is a huge part of changing that coping mechanism to something positive. Because if it's not about coping with something, if you're free to go, well, unless it's like, drugs or alcohol or something horrible, self-harm, or, the things that are harmful to you, I'm not encouraging you to go do those things. But I'm saying if
Yeah.
it's something positive,
Yeah.
right? But if you feel driven and you're asking, and that there's something underlying there that you're just trying to get away from, then the answer to that would be escape. And then that, okay, I need to deal with this, because otherwise this isn't going to help me. How is
Yeah.
this benefiting me in the long run?
Yeah.
And it's not, because all you're doing is adding another problem on top of your original issue,
Yeah.
because your addiction is a problem. And so you're just adding more issues to your life, because now you have to break this addiction problem on top of your other problem. And so it makes it even harder to live your life.
Yeah. I
And
think another, oh, go ahead.
when going back to drugs and alcohol and stuff like that, it only numbs your pain for a time. And from my understanding, from people I've talked to, people who have gone through it, it numbs it for shorter and shorter and shorter amounts of time. So you need to do more or harder drugs. You need to do more or like harder liquor. You need, like in self-harm, you need to do more and more harm to yourself in order to feel that numbness again. And so if you're relying on that to numb yourself, you're digging yourself a hole that's going to be very hard to get out of, because you have gone so far into it that it's a lot harder to get out. Like if you're into that hard drugs, the best way to get out is rehab, right? Like it's not easy to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's my thing, is like, be careful what you're doing, because it only numbs your pain for a little time, and it gets
Yeah.
shorter each time unless you do something worse. And so for me, with the reading, I became so obsessed with reading, I would read instead of socializing with people. I had no friends because I would rather be at home reading than dealing with anything, including people. And that was
Yeah.
so unhealthy, because it it meant I had no friends. And I'm sorry, I enjoy my friends now. I love my life. I don't want to ever live in isolation like that again. But it brought me to the point where I would rather read a book than have a conversation, because in that conversation, it could come to the point where that thing that I'm avoiding is rearing its ugly head, and I have to start dealing with it, and I don't want to.
Yeah. I think another thing too is we have to get to the point where we're willing to be honest with ourselves,
Yeah.
where we recognize the fact that, these activities or these substances in our life have become more than just what they are on the surface. Like, if it was exercise, or if it was, like for me, an eating um condition, right?
Yeah.
To be honest with yourself and to recognize where you're at, because that's the first step in being able to make positive change. Because if you are in the position
True.
where if you're like, I have no addiction, I'm not avoiding my issues, right? If you are of that opinion, then it's going to be a lot harder for you to make positive changes because you are acting in denial, right?
Mm-hmm.
So being honest with yourself and being willing to just take a really honest assessment of where you're at and how you're coping. I think that's really huge as well. And in regards to numbing, like with medication or even numbing with addiction, it's okay to feel your feelings. In fact, you need to feel your feelings. And so I would urge you and beg you to allow yourself to feel. You just, for example, if you just had a loved one die in a, traumatic crash, it's okay to grieve. In fact, it's necessary to grieve. That would not be the time to bury that and pretend it didn't happen and to move on with your life, because that's going to cause so many issues in your life. And so that is also a positive coping mechanism. And you might think, seriously, feeling what I'm feeling is positive coping mechanism? Trust me, to feel what you need to feel actually helps you move through it quicker. It helps you heal quicker. I heard the saying once, grief will last forever unless you mourn, right? The mourning is actually the expression of the grief, right? And so you have to allow yourself to feel the depth of what you're going through and to acknowledge the fact that these things are happening. Because if you pretend that they're not there, that doesn't take the pain away.
And the intensity of the feelings or the pain in the beginning is why you're scared. We're acknowledging that that's a lot of pain. We're acknowledging that's a lot of intense emotion. We know that. But if you move through it in the beginning, it does get easier. It does lighten up and it does pass, especially once you've dealt with that emotion or that traumatic event or that issue. Once you've dealt with it, that emotion is gone and you're free from it and you're free from that pain. But you can't get free until you go through it. You can avoid it all you want, but until you go through it, you are not going to be free. You're going to be chained to that and whatever you're using to avoid that.
Absolutely. I like the saying from Brene Brown. She says, I'm going to lean in and feel it all. Right? And I think that's such a huge, like, such a good way of describing it. Like, and I've been developing this skill, and it's been helping me, like, to when I'm going through things, is to say, wow, like, I'm really having a hard time right now, and this is what I'm feeling, and allow myself to actually feel it and move through it and allow myself to process it and face it head on. Like, so critical in being able to process these stressful and traumatic events in our lives. Another tool that I like to bring up today too is it's called the responsibility ladder. And it's an incredible tool to use, especially when you're going through trials and circumstances that are difficult. And it's, imagine it's like a ladder, and you can Google on the computer, responsibility ladder. And there's many, some people have made abbreviations to it, but you'll get the concept of what it is. Just imagine a ladder, and on the bottom portion of the ladder, they're victim mentalities or ways that we feel powerless in our life. And some of the things we might operate in or tell ourselves in those times or process our life is, the bottom rung is that we're completely unaware that we have problems. The next rung is that we blame others for what we're going through. The next rung is we make excuses saying, I can't get better because, or I can't face this because. And the next one after that is you wait and you hope. So you just say, I'm powerless over this, but I'm just going to wait and hope that one day it'll get better. None of those mindsets are going to help you in your process of healing. But as you continue to move up the ladder, it changes to actions of responsibility and ways that you can become more powerful in your life and take positive action in your life to work through these issues. And so then the next rung after that is accepting and acknowledging your current reality. And these are some things that Connie and I have already talked about. To really accept where you're at, take an honest look at your life and realize where you are and accept and acknowledge the reality that you're at. The next one is to own it and embrace it. And then the next one is to find solutions. So when you realize the fact that, okay, this is where my life's at right now, the most powerful thing you can do is to say, okay, well, what can I do about it? And that's part of taking responsibility. It's like seeing where you are in your life and what you can do about it, and then taking action and doing it. And then the final rung on this responsibility ladder is to fix it, to make it happen. And that's just to follow through with what you know to do. And so I encourage you to look that up. You can print one off, put it on your wall. Oftentimes when my children are struggling, I'll say, hey, look where you're on this ladder, right? And sometimes they're right down at the bottom of, they can't get out of the blaming others stage, but they recognize the fact that they don't want to stay there. They want to be able to move past their problem. They want to move into victory. They want to be able to cope with it in a positive way. And so I try to train them and teach them how, even if they find themselves in, a victim mentality or a powerless mentality, they have the ability to go and become more responsible and look at their life from the perspective of wanting to overcome and wanting to become all that they are designed to be. And so I encourage you to do that. It will help you also recognize where you're at, where you're struggling, and maybe where you need more support.
And I think sometimes we hide from ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? Like we we don't actually examine our own lives, and we are unaware. I think about those 15 years, how unaware I was, how, I had this huge thing that I just wasn't acknowledging. And so it really takes a lot for you to sit down and really look at yourself and see those areas, but it's worth it because, I'm a much freer person than I used to be, and my life is so much more vital and so much more exciting and so much more. I'm enjoy my life so much more is what I'm getting at. And we all want to live lives where we're freer and we can enjoy life and get the most out of it. And so we just want to encourage you down that road. And that it does mean that you have to take some responsibility. It does mean that you need to move through those issues and those tough things, but there's greater things on the other side of that.
Yeah. And don't let fear hold you back, the fear of moving through the pain or moving through the difficulty. Because if you just choose to stay on this side of it, you're going to basically struggle with it for the rest of your life. But if you move through it, once you get to the other side, then that's behind you and you can just move forward.
And the fear almost makes it seem worse than it actually is to experience, because you're just so afraid.
The acronym for fear is actually false evidence appearing real. So it's true. If you're feeling fearful about something, it's often being magnified bigger than it actually is. That's so true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us again. I hope that this brought some clarity and some more things that you can look for in your life and see if these are some coping strategies that you have used or are currently using, and maybe some ways that you can shift that into something more beneficial for yourself. And if you want more support or resources in this, I would also recommend that you check out our webinar from this month. We were also talking about coping mechanisms. You can find that on our website at nosafoundation.com or also on our YouTube channel. And we'll put links to those resources in the notes of this podcast. And yeah, just thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the NOSA Unleashed podcast. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the NOSA Unleashed podcast.